Hereby I open this academic ceremony in which Carlotta Jarach will defend the academic thesis, The Epidemiology of Tinnitus in Italy and Europe, Burden, Risk Factors and Implications for Public Health. May I invite you to present a summary of your study and the conclusions of your thesis.
Thank you. Dear Prorector, esteemed members of the Corona, supervisors, family and friends, today I will provide you an overview of a condition called tinnitus alongside with its most significant epidemiological aspects, both in the Italian and European context, thanks to the work I've conducted at Mario Negri Institute for Pharmaceutical Research in Milan, Italy. When discussing tinnitus, a universally accepted definition is still lacking among the scientific community. Nevertheless, tinnitus can be understood as the perception of sounds in the absence of corresponding external acoustic stimuli. For many individuals, tinnitus is not just a simple noise, but a source of genuine distress. In fact, severe forms of tinnitus can significantly impair the quality of life for those affected, making tinnitus a symptom that is critical for public health. Research on tinnitus faces multiple challenges, largely due to the difficulty in precisely defining what can be considered tinnitus and the absence of an accurate and objective diagnostic method. For this reason, the first major consequence of this is a challenge in estimating the prevalence of the symptom, and a second important aspect in characterizing the burden of tinnitus is its economic impact, both on patients and on healthcare systems. The scientific literature on tinnitus is predominantly comprised of cross-sectional studies, which fail to provide clear indications regarding determinants of tinnitus. And lastly, clinical practice still lacks a definitive response on how to treat patients with tinnitus, despite several options have been proposed in the past. So with these questions in mind, my research over the past years has aimed to address some of these gaps by conducting epidemiological studies with various designs. In particular, to estimate the global prevalence of tinnitus, I performed a systematic review and meta-analysis of the existing literature, and to explore the economic burden of tinnitus, I conducted a cross-sectional study across 5 European countries. To investigate the potential determinants of tinnitus, I analyzed data from 3 studies with 3 distinct designs, in particular a cross-sectional study to evaluate the impact of COVID-19 due to the historical context in which my PhD was performed, and then a case control and a cohort study to understand the role of diet on tinnitus onset. And finally, to address the range of therapies investigated in tinnitus research, I conducted another systematic review and meta-analysis evaluating all randomized controlled trials for tinnitus. Starting with the first question regarding the prevalence of tinnitus, as I mentioned, I conducted a systematic review which revealed that the prevalence of any tinnitus is approximately 14%, while severe tinnitus affect around 2% of the population. We also found that the prevalence increases with increasing age, reaching almost 24% among those aged 65 years old or older. We then can state that the magnitude is approximately 740 million people and 120 million people worldwide, respectively, with any and severe tinnitus. We were also able to estimate the incidence of the phenomenon, meaning the new cases each year, finding an annual incidence rate of approximately 1%, but evidence on this was significantly lower than the evidence on prevalence because research on the topic is mainly stems from cross-sectional studies. And additionally, another notable finding includes differences around the globe among continents and countries. The second major research question was to address the issue of economic burden. So while the potential cost of a debilitating symptom like tinnitus was already hypothesized, prior our investigation, very few had attempted to quantify this cost, and none of them had done with a multi-country approach. So to understand the so-called out-of-pocket expenses, meaning the expenses that people with tinnitus were directly paying, within the Unity project, that was a Horizon 2020 funded project, we investigated the cost around 5 main key areas of interest. And we found that on average, a person with any tinnitus spent 565 euros per year, which translates to more than 17 billion euros only out of pocket in these 5 countries considered. Another important aspect we found was that this was increasing with increasing severity, reaching almost 1,500 euros for a person with severe tinnitus. Healthcare visits and complementary medicine like acupuncture were the areas where people were paying the most. And we actually have to take into account that already on top of this already astronomical figure, we have to also add all the costs associated with, for example, indirect costs, but also costs covered by national health systems and insurances, as those were only the out-of-pocket ones. In our investigations on determinants, we conducted a study to assess the potential role of COVID-19. This cross-sectional study involved 4,400 individuals that were representative of those aged over 65 in Lombardy. That was one of the regions in Italy that was hit the most during the first stages of the pandemic. We asked several questions to these people. Specifically, we asked them to indicate if the tinnitus had improved, worsened, or remained unchanged compared to the previous year. What we found was that the large majority of the people reporting a tinnitus diagnosis did not experience a change during the COVID-19 pandemic, and also participants with a COVID-19 diagnosis reported no tinnitus change in their tinnitus severity, which led us to conclude that nor the SARS-CoV-2 infection or the COVID-19 confinement appear to have a role in increasing severity or incidence of tinnitus. Once again, because the most significant limitations in tinnitus research is also the lack of data from analytical studies, we sought to investigate potential risk factors using a case control study conducted in Italy and a cohort study conducted in Sweden. Our findings highlight the importance of diet, as we found a protective effect of several foods, in particular caffeine, butter, protein, and fruit and vegetables. So we can actually say that a diversified diet seems to be protective against tinnitus onset, but of course it's too early to provide any preventive recommendation based on what we found in these studies. We come to the very final research questions of my PhD, that was to identify the evidence on tinnitus treatments. In order to answer this question, I conducted another systematic review and meta-analysis on the topic, specifically on all randomized controlled trials. We categorized all the studies found in these 5 main categories: psychological treatments, pharmacological treatments, complementary medicine and dietary supplements, health treatments, and neuromodulation approaches. What we found was that for the first time we were able to comprehensively estimate the efficacy of various treatments in one single work. That was a major pro of this type of analysis. However, we found that the majority of the studies suffer a high risk of bias. Based on the around 100 studies that were analyzed, we confirmed the efficacy of psychological treatments, some pharmacological treatments, neuromodulation approaches in reducing tinnitus severity. But for sure, because we highlighted several methodological issues, such as the frequent use of small sample sizes, future research should focus on enhancing the quality of clinical trials. This will surely help pave the way towards a clear care pathway for people suffering from tinnitus. So we now came to the conclusions of my thesis. Thanks to the first meta-analysis conducted on the topic, it's now evident that tinnitus is a prevalent condition, and we can even provide a precise estimate of it, which contributes to increase awareness on the issue. Just as we have succeeded in recognizing the magnitude of the phenomenon, we can now affirm that the economic burden is also significant, comparable to that of other debilitating conditions. Research on risk factors has proven to be challenges due to the scarcity of analytical studies. However, the literature reviews that we conducted reveal potential for future studies. And finally, the lack of a clear answer regarding available treatments align with the low methodological quality of tinnitus interventions. And therefore, for future research, we should aim for greater standardization of methods, higher quality in conducting randomized controlled trials, the following of existing guidelines in clinical practice, as well as advocate for more funding in tinnitus research. Here are the publications and manuscripts where you can explore more in detail what was discussed today. So I would like to thank you all for the attention, and especially my supervisor, Professor Vandenbrand, Professor Odone, and Dr. Gallos for their invaluable guidance during these years, as well as all the research group at Mario Negri Institute and throughout Europe. I will now give the floor back to the prorector.
Thank you for your presentation. The opposition will be opened by Professor Evers, Professor of Public Health Technology Assessment at this university. Professor Evers was also the chair of the assessment committee.
Thank you, Pro-Rector. Dear candidates, first and foremost, I would like to congratulate you on a beautiful thesis. I've read it with great interest and appreciation. Your work is critically but also timely, I think. Tinnitus is increasing, and it's important that we learn more about that. And I also saw that throughout the chapters you use various techniques, varying from cross-sectional studies, meta-analysis, and burden of disease studies. In my congratulations, I would also like to include your supervisory team, which we saw beautifully on the last pictures, and your family and friends, either here or online, who probably will be following you. Of course, I'm not here to only exchange compliments, and my role is today to also have a discussion with you. And looking at my background, you're not surprised that I'm going to ask and discuss chapter 3 with you. Before I begin, may I suggest that one of your paronyms can read out proposition number 2.
The burden of tinnitus is significant from an economic standpoint. Weigh in on patients' out-of-pocket expenses, this thesis.
Okay, thank you very much. I was, as a health economist, I was a bit surprised when reading the chapter and seeing the title, because you referring to out-of-pocket expenses. While to my opinion, a lot of the things which you have there are healthcare costs. So maybe as a starter, could you enlighten me a bit why you chose maybe this proposition and this title?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for the compliment, and also for the question that actually allow me to explain something that within the team we discussed a lot. So something that we encountered in these years, also unrelated to this specific study, was indeed the sense of isolation that these patients were feeling, especially in the Italian context, where there is no sort of clear pathway that they have to follow in order to find relief from their tinnitus. And so we were mostly interested in understanding where they are really looking for this type of relief. And that was the reason why we were really interested in understanding the patients themselves and the family themselves in order to understand where they are putting their efforts, financial efforts. And so when we also were asking them how much they were paying for their healthcare visits, for example, that eventually was one of the main source of expenses. we were not interested in, for example, understanding how much these expenses really cost for the healthcare system in general, or if these visits were maybe refunded by healthcare insurances, but really what was the burden for them as individuals. Also because in relation with the fact that there is no cure, it could be from a public health perspective really a problem if they are seeking help from not evidence-based approaches, which was also in a way underlined in that same article, because the majority of the expenses rather than the healthcare visits were indeed the complementary medicine approaches.
So if I have what you're saying right, is that because you asked for a lot of healthcare, you asked for psychologists, GPs, hospital visits, outpatient, etc. So you actually ask what did you pay out of pocket and what part is not reimbursed by either an NHS or insurance company.
So yeah, the question was precisely how much did you pay, and if that was covered by your national health system, for example, in the UK or in Italy, you had to say 0. But then that visit costed, those visits were included in the total number of the visits, but without actually weighting in the costs that we were calculating. So in that way, we were able to understand really both how much was how much was spent by the patients themselves, but also who were the main healthcare providers visited. So not necessarily the ones that were most visited were also the ones where the patients were spending the most. So for example, the GP was visited a lot, the ENT, for example, of course, was visited a lot, but that necessarily didn't impact the out-of-pocket expenses as much as an acupuncturist or a psychiatrist.
And because from a health economist, this is basically then a study from a patient perspective, although it's not explicitly mentioned. And I was just wondering, because you looked at an example of an earlier study here in the Netherlands, where they looked from a societal and a healthcare perspective, and this would have been a great opportunity to just show, the societal perspective, the healthcare perspective, and the patient perspective, without any large additional effort. But you didn't decide upon that, so I was wondering why. And maybe it's also because it was a European study. Sometimes things are defined in a European study, and you didn't have any choice. And if that's the case, would you do it differently this time?
Yeah, so indeed that was within a Horizon 2020 funded project that had other, of course, objective, and that was a little piece of the overall picture. If I would have done differently anything, probably I would be actually more precise in the questionnaire itself, meaning that eventually when analyzing data, we realized that many of the questions were redundant sometimes, especially if the best example is the fact that if you are visiting a psychologist, you are probably visiting the psychologist because of psychotherapy, and the other way around. So sometimes the questionnaire was a little bit redundant, and so that also implied a huge work in data cleaning, and of course, a better questionnaire would have been for sure something that in the future I would have done differently.
Yeah, because the questionnaire was basically, which you used, not intended to do the things which you looked at. And if we continue a bit with that patient perspective, I know I've done some work in tinnitus a long time ago, but also I know some people who have it. And what I see from a patient perspective is that not, the burden is not in the out-of-pocket expenses to healthcare facilities, but it's much more that sometimes you cannot do your work because you have to change your work, or you cannot go to school, or you cannot do any labor activities or informal activities, and even family life can be hard, which is very much more impacting you, and which you also could translate in monetary terms than, let's say, the out-of-pocket expenses. So why didn't you then, if you say I'm going to look at the patient perspective, why did you only look at the healthcare sector and not at the other sectors, which in my opinion, but I didn't do this study, but what I know from earlier work, is much more important to the patient than, let's say, the few healthcare expenses.
That is true, and also this is the reason why one question was actually trying to address that point. So we asked patients if they had any sick day leaves because of the tinnitus, and what we indeed found was that the more severe the tinnitus was, of course, the more days they were losing because of that. And so, of course, work absenteeism in general plays a huge role in all the indirect costs associated in terms of the economic burden of a condition. So indeed, we can picture in the future, if we are able to do a more comprehensive economic analysis, that of course this type of costs play also a huge role both to the patient themselves, but also to the society, because again of work absenteeism due to the condition.
But suppose, I'm a professor here and I get tinnitus, which I don't hope, and I'm not able to work because there's too much noise, surroundings. Then I would maybe change job and become, let's say, a writer where I sit at home. And I lose a lot of income. That's a big part which you're missing, because people might already in their, let's say, prodromal phase decide upon things which they wouldn't prefer or would prefer to do in this. So I'm wondering a bit whether you're missing not a large part of what is the impact of the patient. That's basically where my question comes from. I was also wondering a bit, when I do cross-country comparison and I look at the health economics of that, it's a hell of a job, because systems are different, cultures are different, what people have to pay for is different, etc. Could you maybe enlighten a bit, because I looked at your methods and I couldn't see how you dealt with that transferability, that there's a difference in how the system is, what is reimbursed, what is not reimbursed. There's also cultural difference. So I was wondering how you dealt with that, or you just ignored it, which also is a way of dealing with that. So I was wondering how you basically, did you see that, and how did you?
Yeah. So the idea at the beginning was indeed to perform also an analysis among countries, but eventually, after we analyzed the data, we realized that, again, the questionnaire maybe was not properly structured for that type of analysis. And eventually we were interested in picturing the main aspects in the tables that we provided, but without, indeed, as you were saying, going to understanding the differences among these digits, because mainly they are not in a way informative, because of course we didn't take into account many aspects that were indeed the difference in the healthcare systems, how the treatments are differently reimbursed. So this is also why in the discussion we didn't spend a lot in understanding the differences among countries.
And maybe my final question, I think on average it was 500 euros and 368 for the less severe group. One of the things, because you don't have a comparator group, you don't have a group without tinnitus, and do you have a feeling whether, if you would look at these countries, is maybe on average people would also spend 360 euros if they don't have a disease? And do you have any feeling of that?
So the figure in general is comparable to other economical studies that were conducted in specific countries, not in multiple countries. So I would say that in matter of finding a relief from a chronic condition that can indeed impact your daily life, maybe in sometimes worse than in other times. And the fact that you are not really able to find an evidence-based cure or an evidence-based treatment, it will be probably higher than someone without any debilitating condition, and it is, according to the literature, comparable to other type of disabilities that, in a way, do lack an effective cure, such as chronic pain. So I do think that they can align to other disabilities without cure.
Thank you for answering my questions, and I give the floor back to the pro-rector.
Thank you. The opposition will be continued by Professor Shekhawat, Professor of Audiology at the Flinders University in Adelaide in Australia. Professor Shekhawat was also a member of the assessment committee, and we highly appreciate your participation to this academic ceremony.
Thank you, Director. It's an absolute delight to be here, and dear candidate, the research you have done in your PhD thesis is extremely valuable to millions of people around the world. I come from Australia. In Australia, 1 in 3 Australians have some form of tinnitus. And if you look a little bit deeper, 1 in 6 of them need some sort of a help. So every time our research group has gone on radio interviews, TV interviews, our inbox have been flooded with hundreds of people trying to reach out and to understand more about research of what's happening in this area and how can we help. So your past few years has definitely made a huge contribution. So I'm very, very happy. The quality of your PhD thesis was absolutely outstanding. So I would like to congratulate you and, of course, your supervisory panel. That's just not possible without their guidance and support. So now coming to questions. Before I ask you the first question, can I ask one of the paronyms to read Proposition 7, please?
With an aging population, tinnitus prevalence is projected to rise significantly. Funding is urgently needed to advance research in tinnitus epidemiology, prevention, and care.
Thank you for that. Now, funding is absolutely crucial to support research, especially in tinnitus. Now, I would want you to imagine that you are standing in front of the policymakers and politicians who can take that decision to invest funding. So what would be your pitch to them? What would be your compelling argument to them that why should they fund tinnitus research?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for the compliments and also for the question. That is indeed very challenging, I must say. So for sure, that proposition that the paronym just read highlight the fact that from a practical perspective, there will be in the future more people with tinnitus, and indeed more people with severe tinnitus, who indeed on a societal perspective will of course impact, as we were seeing before in the other answers and questions, an important aspect in how our system works in terms of employment and of course absenteeism. So trying to find a cure, that is actually an important point that it's worth to highlight. Right now, we do lack an effective cure. We actually lack understanding of what a cure for tinnitus is, because we do have sort of thresholds that we want to decrease in terms of severity, but then is not necessarily a cure for people with tinnitus. So if I have to advocate to a policymaker to ask for more funding, it will be for sure matter of having how do you say, a practical reason that we do have more people with tinnitus in the future, and that this is not impacting only them, but it's impacting, in a way, society overall.
Thank you, dear candidate, for that wonderful answer. You touched upon this really important point about finding cure for tinnitus. Now, we do understand tinnitus is a very heterogeneous condition. No two people with similar hearing profile or tinnitus profile may perceive tinnitus in the same way, or the way tinnitus will have impact on their quality of life could be slightly different. So what is your honest opinion about, can there be a cure for tinnitus, or should we start looking more into offering really strong personalized management options for people?
I think the second. During these years, I've understood that a one-fits-all approach is not possible, not necessarily only because people with maybe normal hearing thresholds do have tinnitus, others without tinnitus are perceiving indeed more stress or more distress, and indeed it also depends in which time of their journey they are, because of course in the acute forms of tinnitus something can work more effectively than for a person that has tinnitus since 20 years, and also the severity itself can vary a lot. Someone can perceive a buzzing as a very, very debilitating, and someone else can easily go on with their life without actually having an impact for their well-being, and again then for society. So it's not only heterogeneous from a physiological point of view, from a biological point of view, but also in the consequences in a way, and the prognosis, of course.
Fantastic, thank you. Which again raises this very important point that we need to research a lot more in depth, and again, which brings to the funding point as well. Now, I quite liked that in your thesis you have done work in the area of diet and tinnitus. Now, that is something which can be very relevant to a lot of us and people who have tinnitus. Now, I understand that you mentioned in your presentation and in your thesis that the work you have done that may not result into a prescriptive diet for people just at this stage. So I've got two sets of questions for this topic. The first one is, what else needs to happen in terms of research so that the community, the scientific community, can reach to a point where they can be a lot more prescriptive about what should or shouldn't be eaten or things like that? That's part number one. Once you answer that question, I'll go to part number two.
Okay. So for sure, I will do a step aside, saying that the reason why we were interested in diet was in a way because both in our meta-analysis but in the literature in general, there are some insights in different prevalences among countries that in a way align also with dietary habits. So for example, one of the main idea that was already before us hypothesized in the literature was that a Mediterranean diet may play a role because countries like Italy, Spain have a lower prevalence than other other countries that may not follow a Mediterranean diet. And so that was one of the, let's say, biological reasons why we try to investigate the role of diet. So what could be done before an epidemiological study maybe would be also to understand from a biological perspective if there is actually something like a macronutrient at a macronutrient level, if there is something that is missing, so if there is a deficiency maybe that could lead to an increase in severity or higher risk of incidence. So then, of course, if we do have evidence biologically, then we can maybe further understand from a dietary perspective in terms of preventive actions how to tackle the issue.
Fantastic. Thank you for answering that. And now imagine you have already done that work and someone has invited you to come to a school and talk to young students, not only about diets, but also about general risk factor which can result into tinnitus. We have a young member sitting in the audience as well. So if you were to go to a school set up and give a quick pitch to young students about things they need to keep in mind, not only from the diet perspective, but also in general risk factor, what exactly will you be telling them?
So for sure, as I say, a healthy lifestyle will, of course, help you in general, and not only on tinnitus incidents, for sure. So on top of all the pro and the consequences that a life without smoking, a life with high physical activity, and a life with low alcohol intake could give you in terms of a lot of other diseases, that could be also relevant in terms of decreasing the risk of incidence for tinnitus, and as well as lower severity on top of all what could be reached without this high-risk lifestyle.
Great. I'm almost towards the end of my question. I would just two more quick questions. The second last question to you is, you mentioned about the quality of clinical trials, how they need to be enhanced based on one of your work you have done in this thesis. So what would be your recommendation, top 2 to 3 recommendations about how we should enhance the quality of our clinical trials?
So for sure, improving in terms of sample sizes, because if we do take for granted that the prevalence is high, it should be that meta-analysis on all our randomized controlled trials do have more than 8,000 subjects, which eventually was what we found. So in all the randomized controlled trials that we analyzed, we ended up having only 8,000 subjects, which is actually strange if we do believe that the prevalence is that high. So this means that the randomized arms do have fewer than 50 participants per arm. So for sure, enhancing the sample sizes. And be really sure that it's actually a randomized controlled trials, because what we found was that apparently, even if it was stating that the tinnitus was, the THI scores, for example, that was one of the questionnaire that was used the most, was the same among groups, was actually already higher in the treatment group most of the time, so if we controlled for that. So of course, then the results of the randomized control trials were less robust for our interpretation.
Look, I think you have answered my questions really, really well. And my very last question to you is very reflective in nature, because we don't learn by just experience, we learn by reflecting on our experience. So your reflection on your 3 years of a PhD journey, what sort of advice you would like to give to other PhD candidates who are thinking to do research in tinnitus area?
So I actually didn't know this word of tinnitus before this PhD, and I must confess that it's really multidisciplinary, and this is something that, of course, is aligned with the difficulty itself of having all these different voices to collaborate and to actually have their needs in terms of professionals. But for sure, it's also what fascinated young researcher the most, because I was in a way exposed to very diverse way of thinking.
Thank you, candidate. Now, dear Prorector, back to you.
Thank you. The opposition will be continued by Dr. George, medical physicist at the Maastricht University Medical Center. Dr. George was also a member of the assessment committee.
Thank you very much, dear Mr. Prorector, for inviting me. It's my pleasure and my great honor to be here and to be able to discuss this excellent thesis with the candidate. Dear candidate, first I want to congratulate you, of course, with this excellent work that you really did. And of course, also my congratulations to your supervision team and all those around you who you are loved by and who you are supported by. I think the quality of your work is not only reflected in the way that it's also largely has been published, but you really did an excellent job in showing that what we often perceive as simple, like this beeping in our head, like beep, that may seem simple, but it's actually quite a complex problem for which we don't have simple solutions. And I think that line of reasoning really is underlined throughout your thesis. I'm also impressed, actually, lastly, by the recommendations that you give at the end of your thesis for patients and for healthcare. And that's what I want to talk to you about. As an audiologist here in Maastricht University Medical Center, I'm head of the TINNITUS team. And we see about 650 patients per year, which is one of the largest teams in the Netherlands. The prevalence, however, as you state in your thesis, is much higher than that. 14%, it's your number. And of those, 2% of the population has severe tinnitus. I would like to discuss with you what that implicates for the future of healthcare. If we are going to provide care to all these people, how can we afford that? Let's just start with some ideas from your end on that question. Yeah.
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for the compliments and for the question also. So the thing is that from a clinical perspective, of course, I'm not a clinician. I do not know precisely how to deal with patients in terms of how to treat them and how to reinsure them, because sometimes as clinicians, I guess that part of the job is also to give bad news sometimes, and bad news in the tinnitus field is sometimes that you are not able to treat them. But something that I think happens sometimes is that maybe a first bad experience will lead the patient not to encounter further treatments, because indeed in the field of research of tinnitus, maybe a person with tinnitus was said once that they have to deal with their symptoms and that there is nothing that then anyone can do for them. And so maybe they are not even willing to ask for more help, and maybe they did just...
Okay, and would that be a good thing, you think?
No, it will not.
Okay,
For sure not. And so in that way, I believe that it's very important to structure within countries a sort of multidisciplinary team where, for example, ENT can also interact a lot with psychologists in terms of not only how to talk to the patients, of course, but in terms of how to direct then the patients in terms of maybe psychological treatments that can work better for them. And so maybe a patient couldn't think about going to the psychology at the first thing if they have ringing in the ears, but maybe that could be an important thing. And on the other way around, having the psychologists that are expert in tinnitus can, of course, help them give suggestion in terms of where to go for an audiological examination, further ENT visits.
Okay, so my proposal would be that more care is not the solution. We need less care. We need some sort of other way of helping these patients. Would you agree with that? And how would you structure this sort of less healthcare but more health networks? But please be creative. I mean, you're the expert here. How would you make sure that everyone gets the help they need without pressing more on healthcare? How would you do that?
That it's indeed very challenging, so for sure we do have guidelines in terms of how to treat patients, but following guidelines is not always the case in the real world.
Maybe a hint could be, of course, we don't have objective measures for tinnitus, and I don't think we'll get there, at least not in the next 10 years. But we do have questionnaires, which can help probably to divide tinnitus patients into subgroups, so that each group of patients gets the help that they need without getting all this healthcare which they don't really profit from. Would questionnaires be part of that solution that you would see?
Maybe yes, in the sense that specific tinnitus questionnaires do have a huge stress in the disability that patients are perceiving. And so, again, because we lack a diagnostic method and we have to, in a way, understanding who are those that are suffering the more. These questionnaires are also a good variable tool because they can help us understanding if the same noise is distressing more someone than another one. So yes, I would think so.
Okay, and are you, maybe another question. I'll get a bit philosophical with you. Maybe one of your paronyms could read out loud proposition number 9.
The essence of global health equity is the idea that something so precious as health might be viewed as a right. Paul Farmer, 2003.
Yes, thank you very much. I think it's very brave of you to touch upon this discussion, which gets philosophical into what is health and what is not. When are you healthy and when are you not? So relating to tinnitus, we used to have, as physicians in the hospital, we used to have the definition that if you were healthy, you had a lack of disease. So if you had no disease, you were healthy per definition. But we've come, we've come to new conclusions, I think. In terms of tinnitus, could you say, for instance, can you be healthy and still have tinnitus? What would be your ideas on that? Yeah,
so I truly believe that what the WHO in the 40s already said, that health is a status of complete well-being, that it's not only the absence of a disease, it's what I truly believe it's true. So regarding this proposition, as epidemiologists, we often do see differences that might arise because of socioeconomic differences as well, and I truly believe that this has not to be the case. So in terms of suffering from tinnitus, but also from anything else, it should be really equal in terms of all having the same resources in terms of finding relief from their suffering. And so this is also why we tried to understand most of the times if there are differences in socioeconomic status, and the next step is if there are differences by socioeconomic status, understanding how as a society, besides the medical field, we are able to tackle these differences, so then we can focus on what is the rest.
Okay, so your answer would be yes, you can be healthy even with tinnitus?
No. Maybe no. In terms of if your well-being, it's not there. I mean, you can be without any other diagnosis rather than tinnitus. Tinnitus can also be your only diagnosis. But if you do suffers in terms of not being able to go to work, being maybe socially isolated because you are not able to enjoy a social event because of your tinnitus, then that it's not well-being, and so then it's not precise as health.
Okay, thank you very much for this very nice answer. Thank you. Back to you, Pro-Rector. Thank you.
Thank you. The opposition will be continued by Dr. Van Kuik, Associate Professor of Clinical Epidemiology at the Maastricht University. Dr. Van Kuik was member of the assessment committee, and he is the secretary of this degree committee.
Thank you, Mr. Pro-Rector. Dear candidate, I too want to start by congratulating you. It's a beautiful thesis. From the name in the back, I get you have a very artistic family member. The inside is beautiful as well. I really enjoyed it, learned a lot. Although it's quite torturous to read a manuscript on the benefits of prosciutto while not having anything in my fridge. I also like to congratulate your supervisory team, of course. My first question is really simple for you, but it's crucial for me. I know little about the etiology of tinnitus, but I'm a huge espresso fan. I drink them all day. My wife thinks I drink too many espresso. While reading your thesis, I thought now I have the arguments to sway her into buying me a new coffee machine for Christmas. So if you could help me argue my case, how many espresso or espressi should I drink per day? And how confident can I convey that message to my wife?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for the compliments and for this question. So unfortunately, I will say that you should buy the coffee machine without me saying that that will help you for your risk for tinnitus.
You don't need to sway me. My wife is the difficult one.
Okay. But indeed, we, as we were saying, recommendations are very difficult to being proposed based on this analysis. But it's also true that this result picture the overall picture of lifestyles in the tinnitus population. And the role of coffee is actually pretty peculiar in the sense that could be also related in general with sleep problems. And tinnitus and sleep problems are in a way related a lot in terms of the fact that very severe tinnitus could lead patients not to properly sleep. So it's always nice to then detect whether it's a real role of caffeine rather than maybe the fact that people that are already experiencing tinnitus symptoms are those that are maybe trying not to drink coffee at all because of sleep problems in general.
I like the modesty in your answer. I think I'm going to lose some of the nuance while telling my wife. On a more serious note, I'm a numbers person. I'm an epidemiologist. And the most prominent number to me in your thesis was the one introduced in proposition number 1. And I hate to do this to you because you seem to be the designated proposition reader. Proposition number 1, please.
Tinnitus is a prevalent condition. Approximately 40% of the global adult population have experienced tinnitus, and more than 2% have had severe tinnitus.
In the rationale of your study, you mentioned that there's a huge heterogeneity in the way that the studies that you've included define prevalence, but also how they define tinnitus. Just for me, how did you define them in chapter number 2?
So we try to group in 5 main, so for any tinnitus, in 5 main categories of how in the literature in general any tinnitus is described. It's true that in the recent past, the idea is to have a precise definition, which is that the ringing has to last for at least 5 minutes, the majority of the time. And so the majority of the studies that were conducted in the past, let's say, 5 to 10 years are trying to have this as a definition of any tinnitus. And then we try to subgroup and seeing the differences among any tinnitus definitions to see indeed if the prevalence was different, and it was different for one category, if I remember correctly, but overall.
I think I'll ask it another way. What if a journalist would come to you after reading proposition number 1, and they would ask you, what does this mean, a prevalence of 14%?
In terms of implications, you mean?
Given the study that you've done, I mean, not the definition of prevalence in tinnitus, but given all the heterogeneity in the background of all those studies, what would the message of you be to that journalist?
So, well, for sure that it's prevalent, and we do have many people with tinnitus, but it's not necessarily true that this 14%, these 740 million people are the same among each other. So it could be that these people, for example, on a clinical perspective, do they have different needs? Do they have different pathways? Will they become part of that 2% that have severe tinnitus, or do they will maybe have the opportunity to handle without becoming severe? So for sure, it's huge magnitude, that it's comparable to other very highly debilitating conditions such as pain. So for sure it's prevalent. And
I was personally very astounded by the huge variance between studies. And in your study, in your review, you stratified by many parameters. And even within these strata, you could see that the between study variance was huge. You quantified this as I-squared, and you could see that many of them were still 100%. Are there any other explanations, even within these strata, for so much heterogeneity between all these studies?
So in terms of understanding tinnitus prevalence and severity, it's very different both in the clinical practice with all these questionnaires, but only from a population perspective. Without a standardized method, it could be challenging understanding precisely all the differences.
Have you thought of using techniques such as meta-regression or anything else to further deepen your understanding of this heterogeneity that causes so many differences between these studies?
So in that meta-analysis on prevalence, the estimates were calculated with random effects models. So in that way, we try to check for the heterogeneity between the studies.
I think it took a lot of courage to still do a meta-analysis, you being the first, and all the previous reviewers just plainly, summarizing all the results from the studies more in a narrative one. Where do you get the courage from, and why didn't the others do this before?
So I had a very important guidance, I would say, but also I think that as I was reading, it was very clear that having a precise estimate of the phenomenon was very important. In terms also of advocating for more funding in terms of research fundings, because having a precise estimate to sell to the European Commission or to whoever is giving you the funds is for sure more effective, rather than say that prevalence ranges between 5 and 40, which in a way is giving, if you say it's that huge range of prevalence, maybe people will not take you seriously, because of course if you are not even able to precisely understand the magnitude of the phenomenon. So for that reason, having a precise estimate was definitely necessary. And starting from then onwards, for sure we, as a community of research, could maybe finding answers on all the other problems in tinnitus research. Thank you.
Carlotta Jarach, the time appointed for defending your thesis has passed. The degree committee will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis and your defense. I request that you and your company await the results of our deliberations and our return in this room.
All right, please.
The PhD defense has now ended. The degree committee will debate the candidate's performance behind closed doors. This process usually takes about 10 minutes.
Long road to the south side. 7 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. On the line, I know you know that I can't read your mind. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile. Long road to the south side, 7 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. On the dash, got my laces tied. Long road, I don't waste no time. Break rules because fate decides. With the team and we chase the light. I make a move, fall down, shake it off. I hate to lose, bad branch, break it off. No room for negativity, praise and love. Prepare for deep part cause we're taking off. Make the mileage, traveling so far from home. Gathering knowledge, other connections. I put the time in to get everything I ever hoped for. It's a challenge and we all in. It's a better future that we go for. And even though these nights seem long, I know that I am never on my own. Know you've won the battle once you've grown. South side, 7 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. 'Cause I'll go the extra mile.
Carlotta Jarach, the degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and your defense in view of its positive verdict and taken into account your previous qualifications. The degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. Professor Van den Brandt is authorized to confirm upon you this academic distinction in accordance with the Dutch university custom. I invite your supervisor to now take the floor.
All right, please.
Do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times?
I promise.
To be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible?
I promise.
Then, by the authority vested in us by law and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, Carlotta Micaela Jarach, the degree of doctor and grant you all rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, I now present you with the degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary, and the other members of the committee, and affixed with the official seal of the university. Yeah, so Dr. Jarach, I can say that now. Congratulations again. Very good job. I was the supervisor here at Maastricht University, but of course the daily supervisor was Silvano Galles. And with great pleasure, I give him the microphone to speak the laudatio.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues, it is with great pleasure that I present this laudatio for Carlotta Micaela Jarach, marking the completion of her PhD journey focused on the epidemiology of tinnitus. Carlotta came to us with a rich and varied educational background, encompassing biotechnology, communication of science, and biostatistics. It was clear from the start, from the beginning, that she had a strong foundation. But during these 3 years, she has shown remarkable growth, refining her skills and applying them with focus and dedication to the specific field of tinnitus epidemiology. As you all have seen in her presentation, Carlotta has used most of the methods and study designs available in epidemiology to significantly advance the knowledge of tinnitus research. Among her major achievements, she conducted a landmark meta-analysis that provided the first global prevalence estimate for tinnitus, a major contribution published in the prestigious journal JAMA Neurology, which may substantially increase the interest of policymakers on tinnitus and tinnitus research. Her systematic review of tinnitus treatment strategies, currently under review in Nature Communications, promises to be equally, if not more, impactful. Carlotta has also been an integral member of our lab, contributing beyond her research. She has co-authored some 15 other papers, not just on tinnitus, and this demonstrates her versatility and productivity as a researcher. In addition, she took the initiative to respond to hundreds of inquiries from tinnitus patients with clarity and compassion. Moreover, Carlotta played a key role in organizing the work of our team. Her proactive approach and ability to relate research to real-world concerns has been a tremendous asset. Over the course of her PhD, Carlotta has become a complete, independent and accomplished researcher. While her ambition and drive may take her beyond the opportunities available at our institute, we are proud of her achievement and confident that she will continue to succeed wherever her career takes her. Carlotta, thank you for your commitment and contributions. We wish you a bright future and hope you will remember that our door is always open. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a warm round of applause for Dr. Carlotta Micaela Jarach.
Dear Dr. Jarach, also on behalf of the University of Maastricht and the Board of Deans, it's a pleasure for me to congratulate you with this new distinction of doctor. We wish you all the best in your future and in your academic career. And hereby I close this academic ceremony. But before congratulating the new doctor, we will make a picture on with the degree committee on the stairs in the central hall, and of course in the presence of the new doctor.
All right.
La partita?